But now when I join, you're going to give me experience with Kubernetes. Because otherwise, next time somebody asks me, do I have X experience? I will not be able to say yes. You need to give me the same thing that you're asking for me to have. In other words, if you are working in a company where you're not increasing your value in the market, yours as a person, that's a reason to leave, an important one.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 141, 5 Reasons to Leave Your Job. Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darren and Victor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darren reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Victor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darren Pope and Victor Farsick. So here we are at the second week of January. We are months now into the Great Resignation.
Is it when all the managers are freaking out because people left the company?
That's when all of leadership is freaking out because people have left the company and they can't find anybody to hire to fill those holes again.
Yeah, there's but it's kind of like a clean break when you think about it. If you're going to leave the company, and I'm assuming that leave the company because you have an offer from a different one, not just leave. It's always good to have some kind of a break between the two, right? There is no better time of the year for a break than Christmas, New Year's Eve, and things around it.
Yep. So if you are one of the people that decided to say, peace out, dear employer, maybe without one of the extra fingers, it was just a single finger. We had this question from Stan, and it came in late last year. It's from Stan Rock. And the question is, name 5 things we should gauge with a current employer if they are still doing, or what they are still doing, that would make you leave. And think of this as a medium enterprise, and we've talked about enterprise in the past couple of episodes. Somewhere between 5 and 20,000 employee range. So that's a large company in my just count perspective. If a company is still doing these 5 things, what are these 5 things that would make you leave? Well, I think number 1 at this point is probably forcing everybody to come back into the office.
Yes, which might, for some people that might be good, for other people might not be so good. Actually, I think that, to be honest, I think that we should all rebel against that. Even if you are a person who prefers to work 5 days a week in an office. Simply put, remote work helps some people. I will not even say many or everybody and stuff like that. Because we might not be able to, we might be living too far from the office. I know that there are people who travel like 3 hours in both directions every day. It might be too expensive. You might have some family reasons that prevent you from going to the office every day and so on and so forth. And especially, I know quite a few people who, during the pandemic, moved away from the place where they were living. You know, kind of, hey, I was born here and I actually moved to San Francisco, not because I want to be there, but because that's where opportunities are. Or, you know, there are quite a few people who changed their location. They went to a place they like to be more. And they will also be affected very much with you have to go to the office starting this date policy.
I mean, certain jobs you would expect you have to go to the office. Manufacturing, if you're in some sort of service type role. But if you're a knowledge worker, meaning you're living behind a keyboard the vast majority of your time, there's no real reason why remote can't work.
Exactly. I said something similar the other day, and the person I was speaking with said, oh, but what if you're in charge of servers, hardware? Then my first reaction is, okay, that's exceptional, but actually it's not. because the vast majority of the things you do, even with on-prem hardware, is also kind of remote. You need to have a person present, so it will never be 100% remote for everybody.
You need somebody there on shift work to punch a button if necessary, change out a drive, do the thing.
Exactly.
But the actual configurations, that's remote. You're not sitting in that nice climate-controlled, really loud data center doing things once it's racked and stacked.
I remember a long time when I was in one of such data centers. When you enter the room, there is kind of like a terminal monitor with a keyboard that actually allows you to control many of the it's not kind of like for specific server, but for quite a few servers, right? And that's kind of remote. It's just that you chose it to be 2 meters remote. It's still going through the wires.
It's silly. So I think if a company is still forcing you to come to the office when obviously remote works, when you have a problem in the middle of the night on a weekend, if something blows up on the weekend, they're not going to make everybody drive in. They're expecting you to work on it from wherever you are. So if working remotely during a fire or a fire drill, as the case may be, is possible, then why can't it be possible all the time?
Exactly. Now, I do not think that we should go to other extreme either. I do not think that we should be forcing people to be remote, to be clear. I can imagine quite a few cases where actually it's a good thing to go to the office. Some people need contact with other people. Some people do not have their houses, apartments equipped actually to effectively work in a remote fashion. Maybe you don't have a separate room and then you're in a living room. And that's a nightmare. And I know actually at least here in Barcelona, apartments are small. I know that many people were suffering during remote. So I'm not in favor we're all going to remote. I'm just saying that it should be an option. Remote, in office, as long as we can afford an office to begin with.
Okay, so that's the first one. And I'm going to sort of mash these two up, is not supporting remote work and flexibility. So remote work, location, flexibility, all that sort of rolls up into this one thing of allowing workers to be able to do their best work wherever they can do their best work. If that's an office, great. If that's in their remote space, whether that's at their home or co-working space or wherever, great. If it's at 10 o'clock at night, if it's 10 o'clock in the morning, as long as the work is done on time and preferably before on time, what does it matter when it's done? It shouldn't make a difference. Maybe that's the second point, is whether it's location specific, is time specific. Work only happens between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. and nothing can happen outside of those hours that it matters to work, except when everything blows up and you have to work on the weekends.
It does make sense to have working hours, to be clear, but maybe they shouldn't be 9 to 5. Maybe it should be, hey, actually, since talking with each other and stuff like that is important, maybe we should have, I don't know, between 11 and 1 o'clock Eastern that everybody is working, so that we can actually have time where a couple of time zones, maybe Europe and the US are all at the same time working. And beyond those couple of hours, hey, it doesn't matter. Unless it's assuming that you're not giving support to customers and things like that, right? When possible.
Having common overlap hours is important, but expecting work to only happen in specific windows of time and can only happen in specific windows of time is a failure as a company. And expecting people to drive in, this goes back to the earlier idea of, okay, you have to go back to the office. Well, if you lived in LA, if you needed to be at the office at 9, you probably need to leave your house at 5 or 4 in the morning and get back home at 10. So your 8-hour day is actually a 16-hour day. That would be dumb.
Exactly. Because the real question is, and I think that comes from the past that we still cannot get away from. But the real question is, are you doing the work that you're being paid to do and potentially exceed at that work? I hope that nobody expects that I'm getting paid because I work from 9 to 5. I'm getting paid for doing specific tasks, for accomplishing certain things. Kind of, unless this is not a supermarket or a restaurant, right? Where you're being paid to do certain work, and that certain work can be done only in those hours. Because effectively, if you're working in a restaurant, you need to be specific hours there. But that's not because somebody wants you, but because that's the only way for you to do your job. But if specific hours are not a requirement to do your job, then that whole thing suddenly doesn't make sense. Like you, that in your kind of real job office work, right? You create content, among other things. That's what you're getting paid for. Should anybody care whether you created some content at 3 o'clock in the morning or maybe 5 o'clock in the morning before anybody woke up?
I hope not, right? Because it doesn't really matter. As long as the content is available on Tuesdays and Thursdays by 9 a.m., then what does it matter?
Actually, now when I think about it, maybe I'm now tempted actually to, next time I switch a job, to actually go a job where the main requirement is to be specific hours, a specific place.
That would be a wonderful thing, right? There's a lot of freedom in that constraint. Because I know that I show up at 9, I leave at 5, and I don't have to think about that place outside of that time at all.
But that's almost never the case. That's my problem. And this is hypocrisy. Is that the word? Hypocrisy, right? Of some employers who say, hey, there is no flexibility. You need to be 9 to 5. There is only flexibility in me asking you to do the work after 5. That's the only flexibility allowed. So kind of like, it's okay for you to work, let's say, at night, but only as extra work.
Yes, not as unpaid work.
Exactly. Not as work, not like the main salary type of work. So it's hypocritical, kind of like I like flexibility only when it actually benefits me.
Okay, so that's number 2. So there's again, sort of a recurring theme is flexibility. And the first point is flexibility for the employee. The second one is flexibility for the employer, which actually is a negative for the employee. So there's 2. A third one.
What's the third one?
Well, if an employer is still forcing you to provide 15 years of experience with Kubernetes before you can start using Kubernetes, this is the hiring mechanism. If they are requiring a college degree to get a job, even though you have proven experience, I don't think that's a good idea. I understand why it's there. It's a weeding out process. But some of the best people I've met barely have graduated high school.
I think it would be a separate story, kind of like how much education prepares you, and I'm choosing the word well, kind of prepares you for your job, right? The other thing is completely who cares about? I mean, is anybody going to ask if ever Elon Musk quits Tesla and goes to a job interview to be a CEO of a different company? Okay, so what did you study, man? Kind of, no. Your CV is what matters. And education just happens to be, after a certain number of years working and having experience, education is at the very bottom. It's kind of like where you started.
And eventually, if your CV is long enough, education sort of falls off the bottom because it just doesn't matter.
The same thing, like if somebody would ask me, okay, so Victor, can you tell me your experience? Where did you work? What did you do in year 2000? Kind of, whoa, it's so low. It's so far ago. It doesn't matter. Does it really matter that I was writing ASP.NET code? I mean, unless you're asking me to work in ASP.NET right now, but then you check that I haven't written anything in the last 15 years, right? So it's really about the recent experience, what matters, right? Last 5 years, for example. That's what really, really matters, not what happened before. And education happened to be, for some people, more than 5 years ago.
Yeah, like in my case, 38 years ago. It's been a long time.
So to me, that's, instead of, the subject is kind of like 5 things to leave your employee. To me, this is one of the things not to go to an interview, to be honest. If I'm asked like for my education, whatever that education is, that means that either somebody did not bother to check my CV or LinkedIn, not CV really, or that somebody is somebody I do not want to work with because it's asking about irrelevant things. That happened a long time ago.
I will also state here, this is also around the hiring process, and this goes to Stan's question. I'm going to sort of flip it just a little bit because Stan's question is specifically current employer still doing things. I'm going to look at it from the outside. If an employer is forcing programmers, let's say it that way, to take coding tests as a part of the interview process, I won't even talk to them.
To me, what is important from current employer, not future employer perspective, but current one, in relation to this subject, is actually expectation that you have certain knowledge when you join the company. You have certain experience. That's what they were looking for, like 75 years with Kubernetes, but not giving you the opportunity to continue growing that knowledge and experience. That's the problem. That's the reason for me to leave. Hey, you want me to have 5 years experience in cloud? Excellent. But now when I join, you're going to give me experience with Kubernetes. Because otherwise, next time somebody asks me, do I have X experience? I will not be able to say yes. You need to give me the same thing that you're asking for me to have. In other words, if you are working in a company where you're not increasing your value in the market, yours as a person, that's a reason to leave. An important one.
And another one that sort of goes in line with that, I'm not sure how this is going to line up specifically with Stan's question, is if the company isn't giving you opportunities to improve, it's not necessarily the company that's not giving you the opportunities, it's your direct management. And their hands may be tied, or they may just be building their own little kingdom, and you're not one of the chosen ones.
To clarify, by opportunity to grow, I do not mean like, what companies do like, hey, you can take a course on our expense every quarter or every half a year, or you have 2 hours free for something. I literally mean, if you're not working on a project, that in itself is an opportunity to grow. So I mean literal work, not kind of you can do a course every once in a while. That's not growing.
Yeah, because if I was to go to a Kubernetes course and then I can't use Kubernetes in my job, then I wasted my time going to that course. From the company perspective, that was a waste of money. It may have been great for me, but it was a waste of money for the company.
It's actually both. It's a waste of money for the company and almost waste of time for you. Because it's like, if your goal is to write a car and then you have opportunity to get the books to read about all the rules about driving the car, which is great, you need to do it. But you still need kind of like driving lessons. You need to drive the car. And you need to do it not... And here's the thing. You can drive that car by yourself, but that's not really how you really learn driving. You need to drive it with an instructor, and which is equivalent to... What did I want to say? Yes, which is equivalent to working on a project. So it's not about you playing around with Kubernetes in your free time. It's kind of, hey, yes, we are using Kubernetes in this project. That's my career path, and I'm working on it for real. Doesn't have to be 100%, just to clarify. I'm fully aware that what I'm saying can be interpreted so every company should drop everything that is more than 3 years old so that people can grow. And that's not what I'm saying. Growth is not really using the latest and greatest always. It's just doing better than what you did last month. And it can be maybe only a fraction of the project. That's okay.
Yeah, I think the thing that's important there is if your current employer gives you the opportunity to do on-the-job learning, take advantage of it, but it's not the employer's job to manage your career.
No, it's definitely not. That's why I don't like that whole we give you courses type of stuff. It's about you making a decision or figuring out whether the job itself, what you're really working on, is aligned with your growth, whatever that something is.
And sometimes that manager can help you get that done. Sometimes your manager can't, or sometimes your manager just won't. And typically when people leave companies, they're not leaving the company, they're leaving their manager.
I think that's vast majority of cases. Because you don't really, especially in bigger companies, you don't really know how the company is. You know how your work environment is, your group of people, maybe a couple of other groups you directly interact with. Your company is always a subset of a company. And in bigger companies, actually, the conditions are vastly different between different groups. It's not even similar. And so it's really about your direct work environment. And who is responsible for that? Your manager. I think that every time a person leaves a company, HR should actually interview the manager.
Especially if it's the same manager losing people left and right.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to lose people. This is such a competitive industry that people are going to leave no matter what. It's only about, hey, okay, so actually 50% of the people left from this group, from this manager. That's a red flag.
That's an anomaly. Yeah. You might want to consider leaving a company if they expect, this is probably going to be very controversial because it's one that I'm in the belief camp on this, not the opinion camp, I think. Maybe it's just my age at this point. An annual review is a complete waste of time.
Yes. I mean, actually, it's a culmination of something else.
That's okay.
That's okay. And kind of like, okay, so we actually promote yearly. So why not have that yearly review? But it's only a culmination. I have a manager, and I mean, I'm not saying me, theoretically. I have a manager that knows almost always what the person's people he or she is managing are doing and how they are and stuff like that. If yearly review or quarterly review is your almost only opportunity to actually speak your mind or to discuss things, then that's terribly wrong.
Living in the decades-old thought process, I'm not saying reviews are bad. I believe reviews are good. I believe goals are good to an extent. But having those measurement points only once a year, and I'm even going to say once a quarter, are way too long. If we're expected to be shipping every 2 weeks on an agile train, then the reviews should be happening every 2 weeks.
That's an example of one of many reasons why agile and today DevOps is failing big time, simply because you just said it yourself. We decided to ship differently. We decided to ship faster and stuff like that, but we did not decide to change the rest of the company. That does not work. I expect if I have a yearly review, then I would expect to be in a company that ships something once or twice a year. Simply because that's a cycle. That's the cadence that we have in this company. I'm not entering now whether that's good or bad, but kind of, okay, so let's align the processes. If you want to be agile and respond to changes and adapt to changes and stuff like that, then that's something that is happening continuously. And that continuity needs to flow into all levels, not only where I am.
Which then leads into what I think is going to be the final one. I don't know how to phrase this one specifically. But if a company is not moving your compensation and looking at compensation from market, and they're only going with compensation based on tenure, then that's a flag to be looking elsewhere. If you are having to say, okay, here are my accomplishments, here's where I have overachieved goals, not goals that were mine, but were in alignment with the company, and you take this to your manager, the manager takes it to compensation committee. Compensation committee says, well, that person is only X amount of years old or only has been in the company for this long, or fill in the blank, whatever other reasons are. So therefore, we're going to decline their request for compensation adjustment. That would be a reason to leave.
I'm not sure whether accomplishments are actually really important.
If what I did was in alignment with company goals, and my work directly impacted the company goal, and that company goal was exceeded.
Yes.
Now, whether I get a cut of that exceeded doesn't really matter, but I at least should have now a place at the table. It's like, hey, look, I have overachieved and I've moved towards those goals. Not personal accomplishments, because within the confines of a company, personal means nothing. What is it that I'm doing for the company? And that's why I try not to mix personal goals against company goals. by the way, there's only so much time in a day. You can't do, oh, by the way, I haven't said this yet. For a company that's espousing true life work, or what's it called, work-life balance, basically all they're saying is, we expect you to give us all your time and your life based on how it's said, work-life balance. So whatever's left over is life. If a company is espousing work-life balance, run far away.
Yeah. But the missing thing there is value in the market. Because for all I know, you might be exceeding goals big time, but you're also paid already three times more than anybody else would pay you. So kind of like, then why would I give you a bonus? Kind of like, you're already being overpaid, right? So it's really value in the market. And value in the market, I do not think that necessarily always works for every single industry, but it works very well for ours because simply there is a huge demand. And this kind of brings me to the thing that I think that everybody should interview every once in a while. I'm not saying that we should all be in the interview process all the time and stuff like that, but every once in a while, do an interview. That doesn't matter whether you're planning to leave or no, just so that you see what's your value in the market. I mean, that's option number one. You can say, hey, I have a lot of friends from different companies, and then I know the value, and they're the type of people who are not shy of telling me how much they earn, right? So there are other ways to figure out what's your market value. But the point is that you need to figure it out. You might be underpaid, you might be overpaid. I was complaining about how this is awful and this and that, and then actually I figured out I'm getting better conditions or higher pay or both of those than most of the people I know that work elsewhere and are on the same level, knowledge-wise, experience-wise. That's a great information. And the only way to get that information is to get out of the organization you work in. And then you say, okay, so actually, I should actually double down. This is the place I want to continue being in, or I'm going to leave, or whatever the decision is. But you need to know. It's the same thing like how you might want to check more than one store before buying something. Because for all you know, your favorite store next door is ripping you off, or it's super cheap.
You have to get outside of where you are to know.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't mean you have to leave, but you have to at least get information from outside. And specifically around Stan's numbers of 5 to 20,000 employees, you know, that's going to be a smaller pool because you're not going to be able to take out of the 5 to 20,000 company and move into a startup that's 10 people and expect better compensation. Typically, you might, depending on if you're got your PhD in data science and they need that, they may be willing to pay a premium for that. But you won't know unless you talk.
The problem with bigger companies or medium, whatever, 10,000 and up, is that their ecosystems in themselves are huge ones. And the bigger the ecosystem, the less opportunity there is to see what's happening outside of the ecosystem. You know, it's like kind of if you live in San Marino, which is a city country, you almost certainly know what's happening outside your country, right? If you live in a huge country, it's less likely. Same thing with companies, right? The bigger the company, the less you tend to know what's happening outside of those walls.
Let's take a really contrived example. Let's say that I am working at large airplane manufacturer, and I'm either working at Boeing or I'm working at Airbus.
As a software engineer.
As a software engineer. Yep, we'll say that too. Right. So I'm working at one of either Boeing or Airbus.
Because if you would be working as really constructing planes, not a software engineer, then the story will be different.
Very different. Right. So I'm working there, and I've already made the decision that I want to stay in writing software for aerospace, specifically for airplane manufacturers. But I've had an existential crisis, and I don't want to work for a manufacturer of airplanes that still uses fossil fuels for the engines. Now, this is a decision that I've made. I'm not going to be able to affect change on either of those two manufacturers. So what am I going to do as a software developer that wants to stay in the airplane manufacturing business? Well, it's my problem, not theirs. So then what do I do? Well, do I go and start a new airplane manufacturing company? Probably not. Or do I say, I guess this idea wasn't that great of an idea. We're not going to be able to get off fossil fuels for airline engines anytime soon, not at scale. So do I move within the company and get out of Boeing or Airbus and go into a different division of said company? Like you were saying, each of these large companies are typically ecosystems within themselves. Many have other opportunities that sometimes it's hard. They've got golden handcuffs on you. Many of these companies, whether they still have them or not, used to have pensions. And sometimes you have a pension that's going to pay out over time. You may have gone into a different division and got another pension. Sometimes staying under a really big umbrella is a good idea. The question is can you put up with the big... Is the problem really with the big umbrella, the Boeing or the Airbus, or is the problem with the division of the umbrella?
Yeah. And I think that all qualifies into going out with the change maybe in what I said before. It's not only necessarily going out only outside of the company, but also going out within a company outside of your group. Because golden handcuffs, almost everybody has them. If you're working in a huge company like Boeing, that probably could be pension or this or that. In a small startup, your golden handcuffs can be shares in a company that are not yet vested. And you have a kind of... but you need to know what's out there. Whatever out means. Maybe out on a different floor of the same building.
So Stan, I don't know if we answered the 5 reasons to leave your job. We tried. That's a hard question, especially at the scale he's asking, 5 to 20,000 employees. Because usually there's just, you look at that, 5,000 people is about 3 times larger than the town I live in. Right.
I'm not going to even give you the math how much larger that is than a company I work in.
Well, exactly. So, I've worked in one company that's been that size as an employee. I've consulted at many that are in that size. But as a large company, I don't know. What do you think? What would be 5 reasons that you would leave your job? Head over to the Slack workspace. The link to that is down in the show notes. Go over to the podcast channel. You'll see a link for this episode 141. Leave your comments there. We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.